Hey everyone, it's Tutorial Tuesday, and this week I'm going to show you how to make the mason jar tissue holders. I have a completed one here just to show you guys an example of what we'll be making. So I'm going to set this aside and I'm going to show you the steps we need to take. I will link all of the links for everything that I purchased in the description of this video so that you can find exactly what I used. I'm using the 1 quart mason jars. I got them from Walmart, and again I'll share the links. I'm using some painter's tape here, and I'm just going to tape off the top here where the lid will go to prevent any paint from getting on it. You don't have to be super precise, but I try to get as precise and as close as I can, and just make sure you get it all around. And I always use a brown paper bag as my working area. And now the first thing that you're going to want to do is read the instructions for your paint. I'm using this, it's also from Walmart. It's some matte finish chalk paint. My directions say to shake the paint well. For glass, clean the surface with alcohol. Clean all other surfaces with window cleaner. Apply 1 to 2 coats in thin, smooth layers, and wait 2 hours between coats. So I'm going to shake this really well and set it aside, and I'm going to just clean my jar really well with alcohol. I just have 50% isopropyl alcohol I got from, I think, Dollar Tree. I'll try and find a link for that for you guys too. And I always just wipe this down really well. I only worry about the outside initially because that's what we're going to paint. So you want to wipe it down and let it dry. Sometimes I'll air dry them, sometimes I'll wipe them down after, but I do my best to air dry because I find that if you wipe it down with a napkin or a paper towel, you risk getting any residue from those on there. I'm going to get all around the rim here. Okay, so I use foam brushes. I have tons and tons on hand for other projects that I do. So I'm going to use those. I also use the Kleenex Perfect Fit. Again, I'll include the link. And I like to use matte Mod Podge. It's really up to you on the Mod Podge. It's really a preference, but since I use matte chalk paint, I really like the matte Mod Podge. I think it goes really well together. So I'm going to just open this up, and the color of this one is Silver Lining. It's from Walmart. I know that. It's like a grayish color. It's very kind of antique looking. It's very pretty. So that's what I like, but you can pick whatever color you'd like. And I'm just going to start by getting some up. And it says on the instructions for the paint, which always read your paint if you don't buy this kind. That's really important. To do slight thin coats. Now I like to do at least 2 coats of this paint. So what I like to do is kind of go around the rim. That way when I go top to bottom, I know it's a little more even. Now I always do it this way, and it might not be perfect, and that's okay, because you are going to do, at least I recommend that you do 2 layers. So I am going to, I like to leave it on my brown paper bag like this. I'm going to do that from now on. I just wanted to show you guys up close so you could really see. But I like to leave it on like this, and I like to hold it from the top and kind of move it around as necessary, but just do light thin layers. That's whatever you miss. I try to get it as coated as well as I can, but I will go over it with at least 2 layers. And then I like to move my paper bag. And we're just going top to bottom, bottom to top. It doesn't really matter. Like I said, I like to do at least 2 coats. So I make sure that I get as much as I can on the first coat, and then I'll go back after. I give it at least 2 hours per the instructions. Sometimes I usually do more. Usually when I make these, I give myself plenty of time to get them done, and I don't try to rush for the 2 hours that the paint gives me. I like to give myself plenty of time, and that just really works best for me to make sure that it's dry, really dry. Because when you're working with chalk paint, if you've never worked with it before, when you do a second layer, sometimes the first layer can come off if you're not careful, depending on the type of paint you use. Now, I use this Waverly from Walmart, and I rarely, if ever, have issues with it. I really, really like this brand, but I have seen it with chalk paint where if you go to put a second layer on, your first layer comes off. So you want to make sure that you're giving it plenty of time to dry. So if you need more than 2 hours, what I like to do is I'm going to do the bottom of this jar now. What I like to do first when I go to do the second layer is paint the bottom. That's because, and I'm going to hold it now at where the tape is. I like to do the bottom first because that's the last thing I painted, so it's the last thing that's going to dry. But I also like to do that because if I screw it up, it's only the bottom, and that's a lot easier to fix than to kind of redo the whole jar to even it out. So if I go to add a second layer, I always add it on the bottom first to make sure that it's going to do it well. So now I'm going to leave this for at least 2 hours to dry, and then we'll come back for a second coat. Okay, I've let this dry for about 4 hours now. I know it says only 2, but I usually like to do it just a little bit longer to be on the safe side. So I shook up my paint again very well, and what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to run my hand all over the whole jar here and make sure I don't have anything on my hand. Make sure it's completely dry. That's important. I'm going to just do a second layer here. Now, sometimes after a second layer, you'll feel like it's not enough, and that's okay. You can do as many layers as you feel you need to be happy. But like I said, I usually do 2, and I'm pretty satisfied with it. So I'm going to pick up my jar, and I'm going to just go top to bottom or bottom to top, doesn't really matter. Now you'll see that it's kind of streaky where I already painted it, but as I'm doing a second layer, that's going to make a difference. Now you can also, I'll go around the rim here again. You can also distress this when you're done. On the instructions it says you can distress it as you'd like. It's really, everything is really preference with this. However you like, what your style is, what you're interested in, it's really all preference. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to go over this whole jar, and just again, I like to usually do a little bit of a thicker layer the second time around. The first layer you did was, well, the first layer I did that I recommend is usually just a thinner layer. That's just to get your base coat on. So I always like to do a thicker second layer. As you can see right here, it's a little thinner, so it's kind of pulling up that first layer of paint. So that's why I like to do a second layer. And that's also why I like to let it dry a little bit longer than the 2 hours recommended. So even though I waited about 4 hours, this is still kind of picking up the first layer here. So I might even do a third layer. Again, it really is just all preference. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to keep doing this whole thing. And I usually find too that when you do the second layer, not only to make it a thicker layer, but also try and keep it all in one direction instead of going back and forth like I did on the first layer. I like to just go either top to bottom or bottom to top. Again, all preference, but these are just the things that I have found work the best. Now I'm going to keep my jar on here and move the bag like I did on the first time, because as you start to add more paint, it's harder to keep holding the jar and moving it around. So just keep painting it to your preference. I might do a third coat on this because I guess I didn't let it dry quite long enough, and it is pulling up a bit of my first layer. So in cases like that, just do a third layer, or you can stop this second layer and then let it dry a little longer and go back. Everything, like I said, is preference. And I am just doing a thicker layer here. So we're gonna just keep going around. And you can, it might be harder for you to see from my angle here, but as I'm doing a thicker coat and going around, it isn't peeling up that first layer so much. So maybe some of it was a little drier than other sides or parts of it. So I'm going to just keep going around. I try to avoid doing more than 2 layers when I can. I just don't, I think once it gets too many layers, it looks too chalky and too thick, and that's a look I try to avoid. But that's, again, just what you like. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish up here. And you can even go back for your third layer and just touch up those areas that weren't as thick or that kind of peeled up with your second layer. You can too just kind of dab it and straighten it out a little, see if that works. That tends to be a good technique. So I'm just going to go ahead and do my bottom, and like I said, I always do the bottom last, and that's the first thing that I usually paint. I didn't this time, but that's because I'm just trying to show you guys quickly how to do things. So note to self and to you guys, don't try and rush. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of sponge it. And this is why I like using the foam brushes too. I think it works really well for trying to sponge up some of these areas. And I can go back again with a thicker layer. I find too, even though I'm doing this, I don't necessarily recommend it, because the more you try and fix it, I find that the more it can just peel up your original layer and then your second layer. And that's really not what you want. See, if you can see it right along here, it's kind of what it's doing. So that's not, and then it looks like really, really chalky. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it, and I'll come back later with a third layer. I probably won't show you guys that because I feel like you understand how to paint this now. So I'll probably just do a third layer, and then I'll come back when I do the Mod Podge and the tissue part. While we wait for the paint on our jar to dry, I'm going to show you what I do with the Kleenex. So now this is the Kleenex Perfect Fit. Comes in a nice perfect container. You can just pop them out, put them right in the jar, which I'll show you after. But we're gonna remove this top piece here, just like this. If you pull this blue tab, it has the nice little fold here for you to pull the Kleenex through. Now I use this in my jar, and I'm going to use my Cricut True Control knife, and I'm going to, I cut around, I usually turn it over and do it from the back because I find it easier, and I just follow the path of the circle here. You'll feel it as you cut, and I just cut it right out of here. Now I'm going to use this in the lid of my mason jar to to pull the tissue right through. And we'll do a little something with it to make it look a little bit fancier than just this. So we'll just pull it right out, but I use this as my guide. This you can throw away, you can keep it for something else, it doesn't really matter. But this is the piece right here that you want as your guide. You can even save this piece to measure inside here to make it a little easier, since this isn't perfectly cut. But we'll get to that after, once we go to Design Space. Okay, so now I have painted, I ended up just touching up a few places instead of doing a complete third layer. So, and then I went ahead and I did a very thin layer of my matte Mod Podge already. You can use any sealant you'd like, but I always use the matte Mod Podge. That works for me. I like the look, and it's cheap with a Michaels coupon. So I just went through, and you can see there are some areas here that didn't completely cover here down at the bottom, but I kind of like that look. It gives it to me a bit of an antique-y type of look, so I do that. If you want to make it look a little more vintage or antique-y, do that before you seal your paint, because chalk paint flakes pretty easily. That's why you want to seal it, and best to do it beforehand. So now we're going to, that's still sticky from my Mod Podge, so I'm going to grab the jar I already did here, and we're going to measure it. So for my design, I usually just write bless you, but it's up to you what you want to write. It's about 3 inches wide by about 5 inches tall. You can go about 5.5 inches. And I'm going to use that as my guide in Design Space. So I'm going to grab my computer here quickly. If you've never watched one of my videos, you can follow my mouse here. So I'm going to go over first to my shapes, and I'm going to grab a square, and I'm going to go up here at the top, and I'm going to unlock my dimensions, and I'm going to type in what we measured on the jar manually and add that in. I'm going to go over to our layers panel and change this to a lighter color to match the color of the paint and to make it easier for you guys to see. I'm going to go over to my text, and I'm going to just type in bless you. I like to go over and do my center alignment right up here. Once the text pops up, I like to center it right away. Now, while we're waiting for that to load, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to grab this piece from the top of our tissue jar, container that we cut earlier. I'm going to measure my outer and my inner circle. So it's about 2 3/8 for the outer one, and about 1 3/4 for the inner one. So I'm going to make sure that my text is centered, and I'm going to change it to the Samantha Upright font. Now that font has a lot of glyphs and extras in it, so what I'm going to do is I'll do that off screen and add all my elements in and cut it, and then we'll come back and finish putting it together. So now I'm going to go over to shapes, and I'm going to select a circle this time, and I'm going to make this one 2 3/8. And then I'm going to, just to make it easy, duplicate it, and I'm going to make this smaller one 1 3/4. And I'm going to change the color on both of them just to make it easier for us to see. So what I'm going to do is drag my mouse around both of them to select them. I'm going to go up to my Align tool. I'm going to center horizontally, and then I'll center vertically. And we want to make an X in here, just like we have on the top here. So we want to make sure we get a good cut. So the easiest way I found to do this is go back to the shapes, and we're going to grab a score line. Now, if you do not already know, you can change a score line to a cut line right in your layers panel. And we're going to change it right to cut. And I'm going to go over, I'm going to rotate it 0.49, and then I'm going to just make it easy. I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to go over to flip, and I'm going to flip it horizontally, and that will make it easier to line them up. And make sure that, you know, you get a good X, and then duplicate them, and we're going to attach them together, and then we're going to size it to fit within that pink circle. We want to remember it goes within the pink one. It doesn't have to be completely perfect, but you want to get it pretty close. You're just pulling the tissues out, so it doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hide this pink circle here, and then I'm going to select these two and attach them together so that the score lines will cut out of the circle. So I'm going to go around and play with everything here, and once I've cut it all, I'll come back and we'll assemble our jar. Okay, so I've given my jar quite a bit of time to dry. I know Mod Podge dries quickly, but I like to give it just a little while. So you can decide what part of your jar you want to put your decal on. I usually like to just move it around until I see, you know, whichever I think looks best. I already cut, weeded, and applied it. I use the Walmart contact paper. I like it because I don't really have to worry about it pulling up any type of paint or anything. So I'm just going to, I just have a scrap piece of contact paper that I found here. So I'm just going to move it around until I'm happy with the placement. And it's not too big, so it's not really going to hit the curve here. So it goes on really nice and easily for us. And I always like to do more of the hinge method. So I kind of just stick down the middle first, and then I push out to the sides. In this case, that's not a huge deal because this is not really on the curve. But I just usually press it down with my fingernails and scrape it a little if you need to. I usually use a matte vinyl, a permanent matte, but all I have right now is glossy on hand. It really doesn't matter. Everything is really preference for these. I like the matte because I do the matte paint and the matte Mod Podge, and I just think it gives it overall a really nice matte look. But you can use glossy, you can use whatever you'd like. This feels dry, but it might be a little wet, and that's why this is giving me a bit of trouble sticking. So I'm just going to carefully make sure everything is down. I have the Cricut scraper, so you can go ahead and use that too if you'd like. I usually just kind of pull back, press it down with my finger, and then you can go over it when you're done and make sure that everything is adhered on there really nice and well. It's up to you. Maybe this did need a little bit longer to dry. It's dry to the touch, it's not sticky at all, but sometimes that does happen. Okay, let's set this aside. Now for the top piece, everything's nice and done. Here you go. And my overall design ended up being just shy of 3 inches wide and a little over 4 inches tall, just for a reference. Now for the mason jar, we have these two pieces here. This part you can set aside. This part is what you want to keep. Now you can go ahead and take your original piece and just hot glue it back in. It's up to you. Or you can get a nice thick piece of scrap paper. I recommend a heavier one. Or this time I decided to do some Cricut foil acetate. It's a little hard to see because it's clear, but I thought that would be something new to try. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a hot glue gun to get it to stay. Now my hot glue is, I feel like it takes a little while. I feel like it dries really quickly. So I'm just going to put a little dab here and then I'm going to stick my foil acetate in, and then I'll go ahead and I'll go around it. If your hot glue gun doesn't dry super quickly, you'll be fine, but mine dries really fast. So I'm just going to go in sections here and just carefully go around the side. Depending on what you're using as this, hot glue is definitely what I recommend. The foil acetate, definitely hot glue. But if you're using a different medium, you might not need that. But I always do it for extra insurance because you will be tugging the tissues through. Not that it's a huge deal, but if you have kids or something, you might want that extra assurance of it being down well. Okay, just going to make sure that's good. I'm going to set it aside. So I got glue everywhere. So I'm going to set that aside to let it harden up, and then I will put it on after. And now the easiest way to add the tissue in, and what I'm going to do first is pull the tape off of the jar here. We don't need that on anymore. So I'm going to just go ahead and peel that off carefully. Set it aside. Now the easiest way to add your tissue in is to kind of stick your finger in to make sure, no, it's hard to see. Make sure you've got it all pushed in together on one side and the other, and you'll see where it kind of starts and ends. Can you see in there how the tissue ends? And you just pull it out and keep it all nice and rolled and squish it in. It will fit perfectly. You just might have to find that right angle and kind of maneuver it. Okay, now what I like to do first is pull up that one in the center here. That is going to be your first one. I'm going to poke it through here, and then you can screw your lid right on. And then you have a mason jar tissue holder.